I'm Hannah Mercer, 33, and 3 months of my life sit under the lights of the Harborview grand polished floors, reflecting the flowers I chose at dawn and the name cards I wrote until my fingers cramped. I told myself this was how families knit back together after loss. I walk in, wearing the navy dress Lily approved for photos, the one that doesn't upstage the bridesmaids with a mental checklist running like a quiet metronome. 2 hours until the ceremony, enough time to confirm the caterer, check the sound, and smooth the last thread of a plan I built from nothing. Somewhere in the lobby's murmur, I hear my father's voice reminding me to breathe and to treat people kindly, even when stress makes that hard. My heels tap toward the ballroom door, and the young man with the tablet steps in front of me with a polite smile that feels like a speed bump. "Are you with the Mercer-Bradley wedding?" he asks, already scrolling. I answer yes and spell my last name steady and careful, as if precision alone can hold the afternoon together. He keeps scrolling, and for the first time all day, the air in that hotel feels a degree colder. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to keep the peace while carrying the load tap, like, and subscribe so these stories reach the people who need them most. I grew up in a small, Midwestern suburb where my dad kept a thermos of coffee in his truck, and my mom set an extra plate for unexpected guests, where neighbors borrowed hedge trimmers and returned them with a thank you note. We weren't fancy, but we were steady. Dad started Mercer Holdings with 3 employees and a second-hand forklift, and by the time I finished college, he had a modest campus on the edge of town, a payroll he guarded like family, and a reputation for paying suppliers on time, even when it meant skipping vacations. He used to say, "We don't measure worth by noise, only by what's there," when the room gets quiet, and those words sank roots in me. I learned to organize chaos, to listen more than I spoke, and to keep promises even when they cost. Lily came into the world with a flash in her smile and a gift for being adored, the kind of person strangers offer extra samples to. Mom delighted in it, calling her light in every room, while she called me steady hands, which I decided was its own kind of compliment. We were different, but close enough to share sweaters and late-night cereal, and when Dad's heart failed 2 years ago, the quiet in our family got loud. After the funeral, I handled condolence calls while Mom and Lily cried together on the couch. I wrote thank you letters by hand because he would have wanted that, and when business partners asked about the company, I told them we were holding steady, even when I saw the worry in their eyes. As months passed, Mom pulled away from anything that required decisions and leaned into anything that looked like appearances. There were luncheons and charity photos, careful smiles on glossy pages, and a conviction that if the surface shone, the rest would settle. I offered to help sort Dad's files, and she said she didn't want to drown in paper. I suggested a meeting with the attorney, and she told me Gregory Barnes was handling it. At first, I assumed my absence from those conversations was accidental, grief fogs calendars, but small oversights collected into a pattern like place settings shifted one chair down so you don't notice until you sit. I found out about an estate discussion when I saw Barnes's car in the driveway and walked into the living room to a stack of documents and a polite smile. Mom said it was just formalities, that legal language was confusing, and that I had enough on my plate with my little event firm. I'd just coordinated the governor's inaugural gala, but correcting her felt like stirring a pot that wasn't on my stove. I told myself we were all doing the best we could, that my role was to keep things moving until the ground stopped tilting. When Lily got engaged 6 months ago, the house filled with light again. Champagne flutes clinked in the kitchen, and she hugged me with a request that felt like a ribbon. Tied to my ribs would I plan the wedding as her gift. The words, of course, came out before I counted the cost, because in our family showing up meant more than saying no. I built a timeline, leveraged every relationship I had for fair rates, and put down deposits when her budget thinned. I kept the receipts in a tidy folder and told myself it was just money and that the real thing we were buying was peace. The Harborview Grand looked like a dream in early fall, polished marble river light slipping through tall windows, white roses standing at attention in cool water I'd checked at sunrise. This world of 5-star suites and valet lines wasn't mine, not really. Mine was the world behind the scenes, where chefs marked pans with masking tape, florists hid scissors in their sleeves, and kindness got you a Lender vase when you needed one. But I moved across that lobby as if I belonged, because what I'd built for Lily belonged because Dad had raised me to take care of details and people, and to do both without making anyone feel small. I told myself the day would be simple dozens of tiny decisions done quietly and well, and maybe that would mend what grief and confusion had frayed. The dress I wore was chosen to step in and out of pictures without drawing attention. I'd pinned my hair the way Lily liked it for family photos and tucked a small sewing kit in my clutch next to breath mints and safety pins. I thought about Dad's chair at the reception and how Uncle Pete would stand in for the father-daughter dance, and I wondered if the first toast would feel like a benediction or a bruise. I decided it could be both. I'd been left out of rooms I expected to be in over the past 2 years, but being useful felt like a doorway of its own, and I walked through it with a steady heart. The hotel air smelled faintly of lemon polish and garden roses, the kind of scent that tricks you into believing everything is under control. And then the young man with the tablet stepped forward and asked my name again, slower this time, his thumb scrolling as though the list itself were arguing with him, and I felt the slightest shift in the day, a thread pulled tight enough to sing. The young man at the ballroom doors held a tablet like it carried the law of the land. His name tag read, Ethan Price. He scrolled once, then twice before looking up at me with careful politeness. "Ma'am, are you at the Mercer-Bradley wedding?" I told him I was, that I was the bride's sister, and waited for the recognition that usually followed. Instead, his brow furrowed. "Could you spell your last name?" I did slowly. He turned the screen toward me, and there it was. My name, printed neatly beneath a heading that said, Vendors and Contractors. For a moment I thought I was reading it wrong. Then I saw the line beside it, Hannah Mercer, Event Coordinator. I heard my own voice falter as I said, "That's not right. I'm family." Ethan looked apologetic but firm. "I can only go by the list provided by the bride and her mother. You're authorized for vendor access only. The service entrance is around back." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Could you call someone? My mother, maybe?" He nodded and stepped aside to radio his supervisor. I stood still watching guests begin to arrive. People from Dad's company, neighbors from the old cul-de-sac faces that had known me since I was little. They passed by, smiling politely before glancing again when they realized I wasn't walking in. My phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Where are you?" "The photographer needs you for lighting checks. Not for photos, not for family introductions, just for lighting." That single word settled like ice in my stomach. A familiar rhythm of heels clicked across the marble, sharp and certain. Mom's voice followed low but controlled. "Hannah." She didn't ask why I was standing there or what was wrong. She just looked at me and sighed. "Why are you causing a scene?" I told her I wasn't, that my name had been listed under vendors. She lifted her chin slightly, a signal she used when closing a deal or ending an argument. "As you should be." "You're working today, aren't you?" Her tone could have frozen the air between us. I felt people watching their curiosity, turning the space around us into a stage. "Mom, I planned this wedding. I'm not staff," I said, trying to steady my voice. She reached into her clutch and pulled out an envelope. "Of course you are, sweetheart, and here's your payment as we agreed." She slipped it toward me like it was a tip, not a thank you. Inside was a check for $3,000. I blinked. "We never agreed on payment," I said. "The deposits alone were $20,000. Her smile didn't waver. "That's your choice. No one asked you to overextend yourself." I wanted to ask what had happened to the promise she'd made to reimburse me after the honeymoon, but the words jammed somewhere behind my ribs. The security guard shifted awkwardly, clearly, wishing he could disappear. Behind Mom, 2 of Dad's former business partners entered the lobby. They hesitated when they saw me. One gave a small nod, the kind reserved for employees, not daughters. The other looked at the check in my hand, then back at Mom. She noticed and lowered her voice. "Hannah, don't make this bigger than it is. You're the help today. You've always been good at that." My breath caught before I could stop it. The words were so calm, so practiced, that they barely sounded cruel until the silence that followed. I thought about the months I'd spent building this day, calls at dawn, late-night spreadsheets, favors from vendors who trusted me, and felt something in me tilt. I glanced toward the ballroom doors. Through the glass, I could see the company table executives who once called Dad a mentor, now seated beneath the floral arch I'd chosen. At the head of it was Lily, radiant in blush silk, surrounded by the kind of attention that made everything else fade. She'd been named interim CEO of Mercer Holdings after Dad's death, a choice that had never made sense but had seemed too painful to challenge at the time. I'd watched the quarterly numbers dip lower each month, seen the reports that Mom ignored, and told myself I would help from the sidelines until Lily found her footing. Standing there now, the reality was hard to deny. They didn't want my help. They wanted my silence. The venue manager approached, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Mercer," she said politely, "a notarized delivery just arrived from Barnes & Associates. It's marked time-sensitive and requires signatures from all beneficiaries before the ceremony." I saw Mom's face tighten. "That won't be necessary right now," she said quickly. "We'll handle it afterward." The manager looked uncertain. "Ma'am, Mr. Barnes emphasized before the ceremony. Legal requirement," he said. The hum of conversation around us grew louder, a low current of curiosity. Guests were still arriving, but no one was pretending not to listen anymore. Lily appeared in the doorway, veil pinned, and perfect, her expression bright until she noticed the tension. "Mom, the photographer's ready for family pictures," she said, glancing at me. "Hannah, could you check with catering? They're short a server." The words landed like a shove. Mom's reply was crisp. "Your sister's busy. She'll join later." I turned to the manager. "May I see the documents?" Mom's eyes snapped toward me. "You don't need to. This is family business." "I am family," I said quietly. "Thomas Mercer was my father, too. That makes me a beneficiary no matter what list you put me on today." The manager hesitated, looking between us. A few guests had stopped walking altogether. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Then Gregory Barnes himself appeared at the far end of the corridor, his leather folder under one arm, his expression composed but strained. "Mrs. Mercer," he called, "we've tried to reach you for months." He stopped beside Lily, offering a gentle nod before turning to Mom. "You've ignored every certified notice. We can't delay any longer." Mom's voice was almost a whisper. "This isn't the time." Barnes shook his head. "It's the only time. The law requires all parties to acknowledge the amended will before assets can be formally transferred." A dozen conversations died mid-sentence. Even Ethan, the security guard, froze where he stood. Lily looked from him to Mom, confusion spreading across her face. "What amended will?" she asked. Mom forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing, darling. There's been a misunderstanding." Barnes opened his folder and removed a sealed envelope. "The will signed 2 weeks before your father's passing. The one you claimed didn't exist when you filed the 2021 version with probate." The words hit like a crack in glass. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. I remembered those final weeks with Dad, his quiet talk about the company, about long-term vision and making things right. I'd thought he was just reflecting. Now I wasn't so sure. Mom's posture stiffened. "We'll discuss this privately." Barnes met her gaze. "We tried that. The court requires transparency when fraud is suspected." The word fraud seemed to echo through the marble hall. Guests began murmuring again, some pulling out their phones. Lily's voice trembled. "Mom, what's happening?" Mom exhaled sharply. "Hannah doesn't need to be involved in this." Actually, Barnes interrupted. "She does. She's the primary witness on several of the accompanying documents, and she's named in the amended will." My own heartbeat was loud enough to drown out the music still drifting faintly from the ballroom. We moved toward the open doors, the three of us, Mom, Lily, and me, followed by a tide of whispers. Inside, the string quartet faltered mid-note as the guests turned. The chandeliers threw soft light over a room dressed in the colors I'd chosen, every ribbon and candle arranged by my own hands. Lily tried to recover her composure, greeting the crowd with a wavering laugh. "Just a small family matter," she said, taking the microphone from the DJ. "Our amazing planner Hannah will handle it." A few guests clapped uncertainly, unsure whether to smile. I stood beside the aisle, the vendor badge that security had given me, still looped around my wrist, like proof of my place. Barnes's voice carried clearly across the hush. Miss Mercer is not a vendor today. She's a beneficiary of the late Thomas Mercer's estate. The sentence rippled through the room like wind through tall grass. Mom's face went pale. "Gregory, that's enough," she snapped. "Hannah, you're embarrassing your sister." I looked straight at her. "I haven't said a word." Lily turned toward me, tears brimming her tone, slipping from frustration to panic. "Why are you doing this?" "This is my wedding day." I took a breath steady enough to keep my hands from shaking. "I didn't bring this here. The truth did." Across the room, Caroline Ward rose from the table where Dad's old colleagues sat. Her presence carried quiet authority. "Maybe it's time everyone hears it," she said softly. Barnes opened the folder again, his hand steady. "Then, let's proceed." The guests leaned forward as though they'd paid for front-row seats. I could feel the marble floor beneath my shoes cool and solid, as if bracing me for what was coming. Mom whispered something I couldn't catch, but Barnes only shook his head. "You've had 2 years to handle this privately," he said. "Now we do it properly." I looked at Lily, at the disbelief on her face, at the trembling in her hands, and knew there was no turning back. The next words from Gregory Barnes would change everything we thought we knew about our father, our inheritance, and the family that had built its foundation on half-truths and silence. The music faded as the ballroom doors closed behind us, sealing 200 guests inside, a silence thick enough to feel. Lily's groom, Paul, stood near the front with his hands clasped, watching us like he wasn't sure whether to stay or run. Gregory Barnes took a steady breath and opened his folder. "This won't take long," he said, though his voice carried the weight of something far from simple. My mother stood stiff beside him, her fingers locked around the handle of her purse as if she could hold her version of the story inside it. I stayed a few steps back, my pulse slow but hard. Barnes faced the crowd. "Before we begin, I need to clarify something important. 2 wills were executed by Mr. Thomas Mercer I in January of 2021, and another properly amended on March 10, 2023, 2 weeks before his passing." A murmur swept through the guests. Mom's shoulders tightened. Lily looked between us, her expression caught between disbelief and embarrassment. "That can't be true," she said quickly, glancing toward Mom for confirmation. "We already went through probate. The estate settled. Only if the final document was presented," Barnes replied evenly. He lifted a sealed envelope stamped with the state court seal. This version was witnessed by 2 individuals, Dr. Alan Pierce, Mr. Mercer's physician, and Caroline Ward, his CFO. Both are present today. I caught Caroline's nod from across the room, calm and sure. Mom's voice dropped sharp with warning. "Gregory, we agreed to uphold the law." He interrupted, his tone polite but firm. Lily looked pale now. "Mom, what is he talking about?" The edges of Mom's voice frayed. "Your father was confused toward the end. Gregory's mistaken." Barnes shook his head. "Your father was fully competent. The amendment is valid and binding. Mrs. Mercer, you were notified twice and declined to acknowledge it." The room shifted as whispers spread through every table. Someone's phone camera light blinked from the corner. Another guest whispered something that sounded like fraud. Barnes turned slightly toward me. "Miss Mercer, your father's final letter references your exclusion from prior meetings. He expected resistance and requested that this amendment be disclosed publicly should any sign of concealment arise." He placed the envelope on the podium. "Given the circumstances, transparency seems appropriate." Mom's hand shot out, gripping the folder. "You can't read that here." Her voice cracked, the mask slipping for the first time. Barnes didn't flinch. The will was meant to be read in the presence of all family members. "That's what we're doing." He unfolded the first page, the legal tone cutting through the murmurs. "To my wife, Diane Mercer, and my daughters, Lily and Hannah, this is my amended last will and testament." He paused, then continued. "My intention in revising this document is to protect what I built and to ensure that it endures under capable leadership." Lily's eyes darted toward Mom, confusion turning to panic. Barnes read on. "I have watched both my daughters grow differently. Lily, my youngest, has always had a generous heart, but she lacks the discipline required for business management. Hannah has proven through her own enterprise that she can sustain success with integrity. I heard the gasps before I processed the words. Lily's groom's hand dropped from her arm. Mom spoke up, her tone rising with each syllable. Thomas never would have said that. You're twisting his words, Barnes continued without looking at her. Therefore, controlling interest in Mercer Holdings, as well as 60% of estate assets, are to transfer to Hannah Mercer. The remaining 40% will be divided equally between my wife Diane and my daughter Lily. The ballroom erupted voices, camera flashes, the rustle of satin and paper. Lily swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Dad left everything to me." Caroline Ward stood then, speaking with calm authority. "He didn't. I was there, Lily. He said the company needed someone who understood responsibility. He said it was you, Hannah." Mom's face went gray, her voice a thin thread. "Caroline, you're lying." Caroline met her gaze evenly. "I have nothing to gain, Diane, only the truth to protect." Barnes raised another page. "There's also a clause addressing concealment. If any party hides or contests this amendment in bad faith, their share is reduced by half, with the remainder transferred to the primary beneficiary." Mom's purse slipped from her hand, scattering a few folded papers across the floor. The crowd fell silent as she stooped to gather them, her fingers shaking. "This is outrageous," she muttered. "You can't prove any of that." Barnes didn't answer. Instead, he retrieved a sealed letter from the folder and held it up. Mr. Mercer wrote this to accompany the will. It was to be read only if concealment occurred. "I believe that condition has been met." He handed it to me. The envelope felt heavy, thicker than paper should. My name was written in my father's familiar hand, steady and confident. "Would you like me to read it?" Barnes asked quietly. I looked at Mom, at Lily, at the room that had once felt like mine and now felt like a courtroom. "Read it," I said. He opened the letter and began. "To my daughter Hannah, who may be hearing this in difficult circumstances, I know your mother and sister well enough to predict they will try to sideline you. What they call coldness, I call strength." Lily made a choked sound. Barnes continued, his voice low and deliberate. "I have seen you build something from the ground up, never taking what wasn't yours. You have my work ethic and my clarity. This company belongs with you." Mom whispered something under her breath, eyes closed. Barnes went on. "Diane, if you are hearing this, then you have done exactly what I feared. You've hidden the truth. I trusted Gregory to ensure my wishes would be honored. If my instructions were ignored, the penalties stand. My only hope is that this public reading restores what is rightfully Hannah's." When Barnes stopped, the silence that followed felt absolute. The letter trembled slightly in his hands. He set it on the podium beside the will. "By law, the amended document supersedes all previous versions," he said quietly. "Control of Mercer Holdings now passes to Hannah Mercer, effective immediately." Lily stared at me, tears streaking her makeup. "You can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "You'll ruin everything." "I didn't do this," I answered softly. "Dad did." Mom rose abruptly. "We're leaving," she said, pulling Lily's arm. Barnes stepped aside but spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Mrs. Mercer, the court will require a full accounting of the last 2 years' operations. Any attempt to move or conceal assets will constitute obstruction." Caroline stepped forward, her tone steady. "The board has already been notified. We'll cooperate fully with Hannah's transition." Gasps rippled again. The photographer lowered his camera, the guests shifting uneasily as reality sank in. I could feel the moment tilting, the power that had been held just beyond my reach, sliding into my hands, not through ambition, but necessity. Mom turned once at the door, eyes fierce with something between fury and disbelief. "You think you've won?" she said quietly. "You have no idea what you've done." Then she pushed the door open and stepped into the corridor, dragging Lily behind her, the veil catching briefly on a chair before tearing free. Barnes gathered the papers and handed them to me. "He trusted you," he said simply. "He always did." My throat tightened, but I nodded. Behind us, voices started again low, uncertain, the hum of a room, realizing it had witnessed something that couldn't be untold. I looked toward the arch of flowers I'd chosen, the candles burning steadily despite everything. The day wasn't over, but nothing about it resembled a wedding anymore. Outside, I could hear the faint echo of camera shutters and whispers following Mom down the hall. The story would spread before the night was over, the bride's sister inheriting the company, the hidden will, the confrontation no one would forget. But in that moment, standing under the same chandeliers my father once danced beneath at company banquets, I felt only the weight of his trust settling on my shoulders like a promise I couldn't ignore. And as the last notes of the string quartet faded into uneasy quiet, I knew the next move wasn't celebration or revenge. It was responsibility, the kind my father had built his life around and the kind I could no longer avoid. The ballroom had never felt so still. 200 guests sat frozen waiting for someone to speak. Gregory Barnes's words still hung in the air like a verdict. My father's company, his life's work, was now mine. I hadn't asked for it, hadn't planned for it, but the paper in his attorney's hand made it undeniable. My mother stared at the will like it might rewrite itself if she glared hard enough. Lily clutched Paul's arm, her makeup streaked from tears. Cameras still recorded their red lights blinking like small, silent witnesses. Barnes closed the folder with careful precision and looked toward me. "Miss Mercer," he said softly, "you are within your rights to take possession immediately." The crowd began to stir again, conversations overlapping in uneasy waves. Someone whispered my name, another voice said fraud, and a few guests started filming openly now. Mom's voice cut through the noise, sharp and thin. "This is outrageous. You think you can humiliate us like this? We'll contest it." Barnes straightened. "On what grounds? Your husband's doctor and financial officer both signed as witnesses." Caroline stood beside him now, her calm composure only making the tension worse for Mom. "The amendment is valid, Diane," she said gently. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. Mom's face twisted in anger. "You're all conspiring against us." She turned to Lily. "We're leaving, now!" But Lily didn't move. She was looking at me, eyes wide, voice shaking. "Is this true? Did he really do this?" I didn't know how to answer without breaking something that was already cracked. Caroline stepped forward before I could speak. "Your father was trying to protect what he built," she said quietly. Hannah was the only one he trusted to keep it alive. Lily let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "So he thought I wasn't good enough," Barnes answered evenly. "He thought you weren't ready." Paul shifted beside her, his jaw tight. "Ready or not?" Mom snapped. "This is our family business. You can't just hand it to an outsider." The word outsider stung even now. Barnes lifted a hand. "Mrs. Mercer, your husband appointed Hannah as emergency executive 3 years ago. That designation is still active. The transition happens today." Gasps followed whispers turning to questions about shares ownership and reputation. I could almost feel the panic moving through the room like wind through glass. Lily's voice rose again, raw and loud enough to echo. "You've ruined my wedding, Hannah. Are you happy now?" I wanted to tell her that I'd been listed as a vendor, not a guest, that I'd worked myself to exhaustion trying to make this day perfect for her. But the words wouldn't come. Barnes's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it before nodding once. "It's confirmed. The amended will has been validated by the probate court, effective immediately." Mom's expression shifted from fury to disbelief. "No, this can't happen here. Not in front of everyone." Caroline looked at her steadily. "That was your husband's condition, Diane. If you hid it, it would be read publicly. He wanted the truth to stand where everyone could see it." A ripple of unease moved through the guests. Some were recording others, pretending to sip champagne they'd forgotten to taste. Barnes turned toward me again. "Miss Mercer, your father left instructions for how the transition should begin. He requested that you notify the board and secure the company accounts." I reached for the folder, my hand trembling just enough for me to notice. The papers felt heavier than they should have, like they carried more than signatures, like they carried expectation. "Mr. Barnes," I said quietly, "please document that I accept the inheritance effective today." My voice didn't shake. He nodded and made a note on the first page. "Witnessed and recorded." Mom stood abruptly. "You can't do this. I'll have your lawyers disbarred." Barnes didn't even look up. "You may consult counsel, but your husband's wishes are clear." Lily pulled free from Paul's arm and faced me again. You're doing this on purpose. You waited for today to make me look like a fool." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Lily," I said gently, "I didn't plan any of this. Dad did." Caroline approached me quietly. "You need to act quickly," she murmured. "The company's financials are unstable. Your mother's been moving funds through side contracts. We've held off as long as we could." I nodded slowly, absorbing the words one at a time. Caroline's expression softened. "Thomas prepared you for this. You know what needs to be done." Barnes closed his briefcase and addressed the room. "This concludes the legal reading of the will. Further discussion will take place in private offices." But no one moved. The crowd wasn't ready to look away from the wreckage. Mom's voice sliced through the quiet. "This is over. You've taken enough from this family." I turned toward her, holding the folder at my side. "No, Mom. You've taken enough. I'm just taking back what's ours." The sentence landed harder than I expected. She flinched, then straightened her voice, trembling with restrained rage. "You think he loved you more because he left you the company. He pitied you, Hannah. That's all." For a moment the room blurred the chandeliers, the faces, the whispers, until Caroline's steady hand touched my shoulder, anchoring me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Barnes said firmly, "please return to your seats. The reception will continue shortly." It was a futile request. Half the guests were already standing, whispering into phones, replaying what they'd recorded. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was a spectacle. I took a slow breath and turned toward the exit. "Mr. Barnes," I said quietly, "file the paperwork first thing Monday morning. I'll meet you at the office to review next steps." He nodded. "I'll be ready." Caroline followed close behind as I walked toward the doors. The crowd parted silently, eyes tracking my every step. Somewhere behind me, Lily sobbed, and Mom called after her, her voice sharp with command. But I kept walking. The vendor badge brushed against my wrist as I reached for the door proof of how they'd seen me, and a reminder of what had changed. Outside the ballroom, the corridor was cooler, quieter. The hum of the air conditioning replaced the crowd's noise. Caroline handed me her phone. "The board's already calling an emergency meeting. They'll support you." I exhaled slowly. "Then we start there." Down the hall, I could still hear faint music as the reception began again, without me half-hearted applause for a first dance no one cared to watch. The wedding I'd built so carefully had collapsed into chaos, and yet somewhere deep beneath the shock, a new steadiness began to take shape. I thought of my father's last conversation, the one where he'd told me that clarity and kindness could coexist, but only if I had the courage to act when it mattered. Standing there in the hotel's marble corridor, I finally understood what he meant. I looked back toward the ballroom doors, the laughter now brittle and strained. Caroline waited beside me, quiet but certain. "Where to now?" she asked. I lifted the folder in my hand. To finish what Dad started. The sound of my heels echoed through the corridor as we walked toward the exit, each step steady and deliberate. The path ahead would be messy audits, confrontation, truth, but the direction was clear. And for the first time in years, I wasn't following anyone else's plan. By the time we reached the glass doors of the lobby, the evening light had turned gold, casting long reflections across the floor. I paused, looking out toward the driveway, filled with guests' cars and photographers still lingering by the curb. Everything about this day had been designed for appearances, and yet it ended with the truth laid bare. As I stepped outside, the warm air met the chill on my skin. Somewhere behind me, the music swelled again, covering what was left of the whispers. I didn't turn back. Whatever waited beyond that ballroom was mine to face. And by Monday morning, everyone at Mercer Holdings would know it. By Monday morning, the air inside Mercer Holdings carried the same faint scent of machine oil and printer paper I'd known since childhood. It was the sound of my father's world phones ringing keyboards, clicking the steady hum of productivity. Caroline met me in the lobby with 2 coffees and a calm nod. "The board's upstairs," she said. "They've been waiting since 8. I followed her into the elevator, the folder from Gregory Barnes still in my hand, the embossed seal catching the light like something both sacred and final. The conference room was full when we entered. Men and women I'd grown up seeing at company picnics, people who had watched my father build this place from a single rented warehouse. They stood as I came in. For a moment I felt the weight of every eye on me, not judgment, just expectation. Caroline set the coffees down and took her seat beside me. "Let's begin," she said, sliding a stack of papers toward me. I opened the meeting by reading the section of the will confirming my authority. There were no questions. No one doubted its legitimacy. But when Caroline started presenting the numbers, the room shifted. In 2 years under Lily's name, Mercer Holdings had lost nearly 30% of its value. Contracts had been canceled or mismanaged. Employee turnover had doubled. And buried in the expense reports were charges that had nothing to do with operations, consulting fees to unknown entities, luxury expenses filed as client hospitality, even payments to relatives listed as vendors. I kept my expression neutral as Caroline spoke. "We've traced nearly $500,000 in questionable spending," she said, most of it authorized by Mrs. Mercer and approved with Lily's electronic signature. A low murmur rippled across the table. One of the senior partners, Mr. Collins, leaned forward. "Can this be recovered?" Caroline glanced at me. "If the funds remain in personal accounts, yes. But we'll need a full audit and legal follow-up." I took a slow breath. "Do it," I said. "Freeze all outgoing payments except payroll and vendor contracts we can verify. Any transaction over $5,000 needs my written approval." Caroline nodded. "Understood." The rest of the meeting unfolded like a post-mortem. Departments reported layoffs, missed deadlines, and morale so low that several teams were considering unionizing. I listened, taking notes, answering questions where I could, promising structure where chaos had reigned. By noon, the board voted unanimously to confirm me as acting CEO pending formal appointment. Caroline placed the resolution in front of me, and I signed it with a pen that once belonged to my father. The ink bled slightly at the edge of the signature. It felt like the closing of one door and the quiet opening of another. After the meeting, I walked through the production floor. Employees stopped what they were doing, watching as I passed. A few smiled, a few nodded. One even clapped softly before realizing no one else had joined in. "Welcome back, Miss Mercer," someone said from the back. I looked toward the voice, a technician I recognized from years ago, still wearing his old ID badge. "It's good to see you," I replied, and meant it. Caroline caught up to me near the elevator. "The staff's relieved," she said. "They've been working under confusion for months. No direction, no accountability." I nodded. "That changes today." She hesitated before adding, "Your mother's been calling. And Lily. They've both tried to access the accounts." "Were they able to?" I asked. "No. The freeze worked, but they're not taking it well." I stared at the elevator numbers rising. "Have Gregory's office send them a written notice. They have 30 days to return any misused funds before we pursue legal action." Caroline hesitated. "Are you sure that's a hard line?" "So was hiding my father's will," I said. The doors opened, and I stepped inside. By the time I reached my office, the one my father used for 30 years, the afternoon sun had shifted across the windows. His old clock still sat on the credenza, ticking evenly. I set the folder beside it and stared at the chair behind the desk. For a long time I didn't sit. I just stood there listening to the faint hum of the building, the echo of decisions made and unmade. Then I sat down and called Gregory Barnes. He answered on the second ring. "I assume the transition's underway." "It is," I said. "I need a legal team to start preparing recovery demands. Caroline's identified the transfers. I'll send a paralegal to collect the documentation. Any communication to your family will come through us," he said. "You shouldn't have direct contact until the audit's complete." "Understood," I replied, "but send them copies of the clauses they triggered. I want them to see every word my father wrote." When I hung up, I looked at the photograph on the shelf, Dad in his work shirt, smiling beside a conveyor line on opening day. He'd written, "Always build on the back," in blue ink. I pressed the frame flat on the desk and whispered, "I'm trying." The next morning, Caroline brought updates. 3 clients who canceled last quarter want to return, she said. They heard about the change in leadership. She paused. "But there's something else. The press is calling. About the wedding." About everything, she said gently. "Someone leaked the video. It's all over social media. Your mother arguing with the attorney, the will being read, the audience reaction." I leaned back in the chair. Then there's no hiding it. We stay professional and focus on the company. No statements, just results. By Wednesday, the phones were ringing non-stop. Reporters wanted interviews, former clients wanted reassurance, and employees wanted clarity. I met with department heads for 10 hours straight, rewriting budgets and signing off on emergency funds to stabilize production. Caroline stayed late with me reviewing every file until the numbers finally balanced. That night, as we shut off the lights, she said, "You know he always believed you'd end up here." I smiled faintly. He believed a lot of things about this family. I'm still figuring out which ones were true. Friday morning brought a new challenge. Gregory called to report that Diane and Lily had both hired counsel to negotiate. They're asking for leniency, he said. They want to avoid criminal charges. Then they return what they took, I answered. Every cent. No negotiation. He hesitated. They'll likely come to you directly, Hannah. Be prepared. By Saturday evening, I found out he was right. A text came through from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Please." "Mom." I didn't reply. Another followed minutes later from Lily. "You're destroying us. I never meant to hurt you. Please pick up." I set the phone face down on my desk and left it that way. Outside, the city lights stretched beyond the office windows, the skyline tinted with the last trace of daylight. I thought of the night my father told me he'd named me emergency executive. It's not about power, he'd said. It's about stewardship. I hadn't understood then what that would cost. Caroline stopped by the doorway. "The auditors will be here Monday. We'll have everything ready." She studied me for a moment. "You did the right thing, Hannah." Maybe I said quietly. But the right thing has a way of feeling wrong when it's your own family. She didn't argue. She just nodded and left her footsteps fading down the hall. I stayed a while longer, the only sound the steady hum of the old clock and the rustle of papers under my hand. The office felt both familiar and foreign, a place I belonged to and one I'd inherited through loss. When I finally turned off the lamp, the light caught the photo of Dad one last time. His smile looked the same as it always had, calm, certain, ready. I locked the door behind me and walked down the empty corridor, the folder under my arm, and the future waiting on the other side of the glass doors. The next day would bring confrontation, maybe even more fallout. But for now the building was quiet. The chaos had paused just long enough for me to breathe, and in that silence I could almost hear my father's voice again, steady as ever, reminding me that leadership begins when the noise ends. Monday began with a storm of flashbulbs outside the building. Reporters lined the sidewalk calling my name as I stepped from the car. Caroline met me at the entrance holding the door open. "They've been here since sunrise," she said quietly. "The wedding videos everywhere." I nodded, slipping past the cameras into the lobby. The noise followed us until the glass doors closed behind. Inside, the world felt steadier. The marble floors, the faint scent of coffee from the break room, even the echo of footsteps, all of it sounded like order. Caroline handed me a file. "Audit results," she said. "You'll want to sit for this." We took the elevator to my office, the hum of machinery filling the silence. The report was thicker than I expected. As I read the numbers blurred into patterns, consulting contracts to non-existent vendors' funds routed through shell accounts and large transfers labeled operational support. Caroline spoke softly. "It wasn't just mismanagement. It was deliberate. Your mother authorized most of it." Lily approved the rest without reading. I closed the folder slowly. "How much?" $500,000. Maybe more once we include the offshore accounts. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "Send the final total to Gregory. We'll recover every cent." Caroline hesitated. "There's something else. Your mother sold her country club membership last week. I think she's trying to raise cash." "Let her," I said. "She'll need it." By noon, Gregory's office confirmed delivery of the legal demand letters, 30 days to repay the funds or face prosecution. It was businesslike, factual, stripped of emotion, exactly how my father would have handled it. Yet under the calm, I could feel something shifting, a quiet sorrow pressing behind my ribs. That evening, as I reviewed contracts in the conference room, my phone lit up again. Mom's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice trembled. "Hannah, we need to talk. "There's nothing left to discuss, Mom. There's everything to discuss. You're tearing this family apart." "The family broke long before I stepped in," I said. "You made choices. Now you're seeing the cost. You're talking like your father," she said bitterly. "Cold, calculated. I'm talking like someone cleaning up the damage." She exhaled shakily. "I did what I thought was right. Lily couldn't handle that company. I was trying to protect her. By hiding a will, by draining accounts. I was desperate. We were all grieving. You had your career. She had nothing." I paused, listening to the static between us. "Then you should have helped her grow, not handed her power she couldn't use." Silence stretched on the line. Then she said softly, "You think this will make you happy? You think Dad would want this? I think he wanted honesty," I said. "That's what I'm giving him." She started to cry, the quiet kind that filled the phone with breath instead of words. I didn't hang up, but I didn't speak either. After a while, she ended the call herself. 2 days later, Lily showed up in the lobby unannounced. Security called upstairs before letting her in. She looked different. Hair pulled back, no makeup, exhaustion replacing the confidence I'd always envied. "Can we talk?" she asked. I led her into my office, closing the door behind us. She sat down, staring at her hands. "I didn't know about the account," she said quickly. "Mom told me the transfers were temporary." "They weren't," I said. "You signed every one of them. I trusted her." "I did too," I replied. "That's how we got here." She nodded, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Hannah. I just thought if I could make her proud, maybe she'd stop comparing us." I watched her for a long moment before answering. "That's not your burden anymore. You don't need to prove yourself through me." She looked up, eyes red. "What happens now? You and Mom have 30 days to return the money. After that, Gregory files charges. I can't stop it." Her face went pale. "Please don't do this. Mom's terrified. She should be. She committed fraud." Lily stood, shaking her head. "You've always wanted to be the hero. Now you get to be the executioner too." "I wanted peace," I said quietly. "But peace doesn't come from pretending." She left without another word. I watched her walk down the hallway, shoulders slumped, the sound of her heels fading until the door closed behind her. That night, Caroline joined me for a late meeting. "You did what you had to," she said, as we reviewed new contracts. "It isn't easy when the people who raised you become the ones you have to hold accountable." I nodded, though I didn't answer. Across the table, the office lights reflected off the framed photograph of Dad, his arm around both of us, at the company's 20th anniversary. I remembered how proud he'd looked that night, how he'd said, "One day this will all be yours, girls. I just hope you handle it better than I did." At the time we'd laughed. Now the words carried a weight he must have known was coming. By Friday, the company's rhythm had started to return. Payroll stabilized, production resumed, and employees began stopping me in the hall to say thank you. Even the investors seemed calmer, their trust rebuilding one call at a time. But the quiet outside those walls told another story. The tabloids had moved on from the wedding, replacing photos of Lily's dress with screenshots of the legal filings. "Mercer family in crisis," the headlines read. I stopped checking after the first few. That weekend Gregory called. "They've both retained separate attorneys," he said. "But it's stalling tactics. They can't deny the documentation. We'll proceed as planned." "Keep me updated," I said. When I hung up, I found myself staring at the city through my office window. The skyline shimmered against the dusk lights flickering on one by one. Below, the world kept moving cars, people, plans, all of it continuing like nothing had changed. Caroline appeared in the doorway. "The last client renewal came through," she said. "We're officially back in the black." For the first time, I smiled. "Then we're on schedule." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "What will you do when the repayment deadline hits?" "Whatever the law requires," I said. "And if they still refuse?" I looked down at the open folder on my desk. "The evidence, the signatures, the trail of betrayal written in ink." "Then they'll learn what accountability looks like," I said softly. Caroline studied me for a moment. "You're stronger than he was, you know." Thomas couldn't separate love from loyalty. I glanced toward the photo again. Maybe that's what I'm learning now. She nodded and left me to the quiet. The clock on the wall ticked steady and certain the same way it had in my father's day. Outside, the last streak of sunset faded into deep blue. I gathered the folders, stacked them neatly, and turned off the light. The 30-day clock had already started, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any boardroom. Somewhere between duty and grief, I knew the next move would change everything again. And this time, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about what kind of family, if any, would remain once the truth had finished its work. The 30 days passed faster than I expected. Each morning began with quiet coffee and ended with calls from Gregory confirming one more deadline missed, one more letter ignored. By the second week, both my mother and sister had stopped responding entirely. Caroline kept the company moving forward, guiding teams through new contracts and reinstated clients while I waited for the inevitable fallout. On the 30th day, Gregory called at 7 a.m. No repayment, he said. No proposal, no communication. We proceed as agreed. I looked out the office window, the city still half asleep below us. File the charges, I said. Make it official. By that afternoon, the legal notices were delivered. Embezzlement, fraud, misappropriation of company funds. It wasn't revenge, it was procedure, but the weight of it still pressed against my chest. Caroline closed my office door. "It's done," she said quietly. "Now we wait." News traveled faster than either of us could contain. By morning, every business outlet in the state was running the story, "Mercer Holdings pursues family legal action." Reporters clustered outside the building again, asking if I planned to testify if the rumors about my mother's role were true. I didn't answer any of them. The company statement drafted with Gregory's help was short and clinical. The Mercer estate is acting to protect shareholders and employees following confirmed evidence of financial misconduct. It said nothing more because there was nothing more to say. 3 days later, Lily called. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I just saw the news," she said. "You really did it. I gave you a chance, I told her. I know," she whispered. "Mom said she'd handle it. I didn't think she'd let it get this far. It's not just about money anymore, Lily. It's about trust." She started to cry. "Paul's leaving," she said. "He says he can't live through another scandal. You've ruined everything." I closed my eyes for a moment. "No, Lily, you ruined it when you let her use you, when you chose silence." She didn't reply. The line went quiet, then disconnected. The following week brought more headlines. Mom's name appeared alongside mine in the local business journal, a photo from some gala years ago under the caption, "A Family Divided." She still hadn't spoken publicly, though she'd hired new attorneys who tried to negotiate. Gregory kept me updated, each call more exhausting than the last. "She's asking for mediation," he said one afternoon. "If we settle privately, she'll return the funds within 60 days, and if we don't, she'll drag it through the courts claiming coercion and emotional distress." Caroline looked up from her notes. "That could take years." I nodded. "Then we mediate, but under our terms." We met in Gregory's conference room the following Monday. My mother arrived first, composed but visibly older, her hair pinned too tightly, her expression controlled. Lily came a few minutes later, her hand trembling as she set her purse down. I sat across from them, the documents already laid out. Mom spoke first. "This has gone far enough," she said. "The company's stable. The press is circling. You've made your point. Now end it." I kept my tone even. "Return the money. Admit what you did. We'll close it quietly." Her mouth tightened. "You'd humiliate your own mother just to feel powerful." "This isn't about power," I said. "It's about accountability." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Can't we fix this another way? We're still family." I looked at her. Family doesn't hide wills. Family doesn't forge signatures. Mom's voice sharpened. "You're destroying your sister's life for a mistake she didn't even understand. Then you shouldn't have used her as a shield." Gregory cleared his throat softly. "Mrs. Mercer, the evidence is clear. A full admission will allow restitution without criminal charges." Mom stared at him for a long moment, then at me. "Your father would be ashamed," she said finally. My hands stayed still on the table. "He'd be disappointed it came to this," I said quietly. "But he'd be proud I didn't look away." Silence settled across the room. Eventually, Mom signed the agreement. Her pen pressed hard enough to tear the paper slightly. Lily followed her signature hesitant. Gregory countersigned, collected the papers, and stood. "We're done here," he said gently. As they gathered their things, Mom paused by the door. "You think you've won?" she said. "But you've lost more than you know." Then she walked out, heels clicking against the tile, her voice echoing down the hall. Lily lingered. "I don't blame you," she said softly. "I just wish it didn't have to end like this." "It doesn't have to," I said. "But that choice isn't mine anymore." She nodded and followed Mom out of the building. Gregory exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "You handled that well," he said. "Few people could stay that calm." I managed a small smile. Years of practice. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something like relief. The audit was closed, the settlement signed, the company secure. Yet the victory felt hollow, necessary, but heavy. Carolyn stopped by my office that evening with 2 glasses of wine. "To survival," she said. "To survival," I repeated, clinking the glass against hers. We sat in the quiet for a while, the city lights reflecting off the windows. "Your father would have been proud," she said. I nodded slowly. "He taught me to finish what I started." "Maybe now you can rest," she said. "I don't think rest is the right word," I said. "Maybe rebuild." The days that followed were quieter. Employees worked with renewed focus, contracts expanded, and clients sent notes thanking us for our transparency. The company's reputation began to heal. But at home, the silence lingered. I hadn't spoken to Mom or Lily since the mediation. Gregory confirmed the funds were being transferred back in installments, each payment a reminder of what had been lost. 2 weeks later, a small envelope arrived at my office, no return address, just my name written in Lily's handwriting. Inside was a note I'm starting over. "I got a job at a law firm. It's not much, but it's mine. I hope someday you can forgive me." I folded the letter carefully and set it in my drawer beside Dad's photograph. That night, I stayed late reviewing quarterly reports. The company was finally profitable again. Caroline stopped by on her way out. "You should go home," she said with a smile. "It's over, Hannah." I looked around the office, my father's clock ticking steadily, the faint smell of coffee, the hum of the building running as it should. "Almost," I said. She tilted her head. "What's left?" "Learning how to let it all go," I said. She gave a small nod and left me there, surrounded by the quiet rhythm of stability returning. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the windows, washing the city lights into blurred streaks of color. I watched them for a while, thinking of my father's words about clarity, the kind that only comes when everything false has been stripped away. When I finally turned off the lights, the office no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. And somewhere deep down, I knew that what came next wouldn't be about retribution or control. It would be about rebuilding what family was supposed to mean, one boundary, one truth, one clean page at a time. A year after that day, the building felt alive again. The factory lines hummed, meetings ran on time, and laughter occasionally drifted through the halls where silence once lived. Mercer Holdings had found its footing steady and sure. Investors returned old clients, sent thank you notes, and employees no longer looked nervous when they saw me in the hall. The company wasn't just surviving anymore, it was growing. Some mornings I'd arrive before sunrise just to watch the light stretch across my father's old office. His clock still ticked from the corner shelf, steady as ever. The brass nameplate on the desk now read mine, but I never replaced his. It stayed beside it, a reminder that legacy doesn't vanish when people leave, it just changes hands. Mom and I hadn't spoken since the mediation. She repaid what the agreement required, then sold her house and moved to a smaller place near Savannah. Gregory told me she'd joined a garden club, something she used to love before business and appearances took over her life. I didn't call, but I didn't block her either. Sometimes distance is its own kind of peace. Lily kept in touch, slowly, cautiously. Her first letter arrived with no return address, just her handwriting, and a few words that carried more honesty than all our years together. She'd found steady work as a receptionist at a small law firm in Denver. She said it felt good to earn something herself, to see her name on a paycheck that didn't come from family. We started exchanging short notes, birthday cards, small updates, and little by little the bitterness faded into something quieter. Not forgiveness yet, but the space where forgiveness could grow. Caroline became more than my CFO. She turned into the anchor I didn't know I needed. We rebuilt the leadership team together, promoted employees who'd stayed loyal during the hardest months, and created a scholarship in Dad's name for young engineers starting out in manufacturing. On the day we launched it, she placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "He'd be proud, you know." I didn't answer right away, but deep down, I hoped she was right. There were nights when I still dreamed of the wedding, the marble floors, the hush of the crowd when the truth came out, the look on my mother's face when her control slipped away. But in the morning, when I walked into the office and saw people working with purpose again, the shame of that memory softened into something else. It had been a turning point, painful but necessary. I once believed justice meant revenge, that setting things right required someone else to fall. But the longer I led, the more I understood what my father meant by stewardship. Justice, when done with dignity, restores what's broken instead of burning it down. That's what Mercer Holdings became, a place rebuilt not on anger, but on clarity and care. One afternoon, about a year after the scandal, a delivery arrived with no sender listed. Inside was a single photo, Lily and me as kids sitting on the factory floor beside Dad while he adjusted a piece of machinery. There was a note taped to the back in Lily's writing. He believed in both of us. Maybe someday I'll earn that belief again. I kept it framed on the shelf next to the clock. It reminded me that even fractured things can find their shape again with time. By spring, we'd broken company records for production and profit. The board offered to host a gala in my honor, but I declined. Instead, we held a quiet dinner for the staff, just long tables, good food, and the kind of laughter that told me the company's heart had finally healed. At the end of the night, I stood by the door as people left, thanking each one by name. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing in my father's shadow. I felt like I was continuing his work. When everyone had gone, I stayed behind, turning off the lights one by one. The last glow came from his office, that same soft golden light against the glass. I walked inside, touched the edge of the old desk, and opened the drawer where I kept his last letter. I'd read it dozens of times, but that night, one line struck differently than before. "Your strength isn't coldness, Hannah. It's clarity. Use it well, and it will never fail you." I folded it carefully and placed it back. The clock ticked on, marking another quiet victory, another step forward. As I left the building, the air outside felt clean and new. I thought of how far things had come, the company, my family, myself. Some wounds never close completely, but healing isn't about erasing the scar. It's about learning to move without pain. I've learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty, and love doesn't excuse betrayal. But respect the kind you give yourself when no one else does. That's what lasts. My father taught me that without ever saying it outright. I just had to live long enough to understand. So if you've ever been treated like the help in your own story, or made to feel invisible by the people you love, remember this: your worth isn't up for debate. It never was. And sometimes the greatest justice isn't what you take back. It's the peace you build when you stop needing their approval to breathe. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it, or tell me about a time you had to stand up for yourself. Maybe someone out there needs to hear your strength too.